Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 305 or 305. My name is Jono Logan, and this is a random book club. So this is a thing that we do every now and then here at Random Encounter whenever there is a book that catches our attention about RPGs or adventure games or video games. And to be honest, it's one of my favorite episodes because, well, it's a book club. And I get to go on here, and usually I get paired with one of my favorite people in the whole damn world. It is Hilary. Hey, Hilary.
Aw. Well, I return the sentiment, and good to be here. Thank you.
So we've done some in the past. We did JRPG book, I believe, in the past, and a few others. And this one is super interesting.
It is.
It totally is. If you've ever visited Fangamer, great site, lots of really cool stuff, lots of merch. They have a really good book section, really interesting book section. And in that book section, you can find a series of books that are called Legends of Localization. So this is Fangamer, and Legends of Localization is also a website owned by a localizer named Clyde Mandelin. Now, Mandelin is a Japanese to English localizer who has worked extensively in the professional video game and anime industries, but he is also very well known for his fan translation works. For example, he is one of the folks responsible for the fan translation of the, as of yet in the West, unreleased tactical RPG, Bahamut's Lagoon. And he's probably better known as the localizer for the fan translation of Mother 3. Mother 3, of course, the meme game. The meme game starring Reggie. If they eventually announce Mother 3, Reggie has to show up. I just feel Nintendo needs to do that for everybody.
At this point, no question.
Yep.
He's teased it. He's made the joke. They have to.
I mean, at this point, he is the joke.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean he is a joke. I mean, he is the joke. So in 2012, Mandelin started a video game website, Legends of Localization, which primarily focused on dissecting video game localizations, how they're done, mistakes, bad examples of localization, basically anything you'd want to know about localization. And the site was a pretty big success. And then in 2015, he released his first book through Fangamer, and that was the Legends of Localization Book 1, The Legend of Zelda. Frankly, I admire anyone who has the guts to put book 1 on their first book. That is like throwing down the gauntlet saying, there's going to be more of these.
Yes, it's a challenge.
Yeah, and there was. The book was focused on the process of localizing the original Legend of Zelda on the Famicom into the version that I imagine that most of the folks listening to this podcast have played on the Nintendo Entertainment System. He then followed this up with another book called Legends of Localization Book 2, Earthbound. It was released in 2016. Now, given his obvious background with the Mother/Earthbound series, that one is just packed full of fascinating tidbits and insights into how that game was localized. There were also a few side projects that he released under the Legends of Localization banner, including a absolutely hilarious book called This Be Book Bad Translations Video Games, which focused on some of the most infamous localization blunders in video game history. It's kind of amazing. And he also released a book called Press Start to Translate, which was about his experiments using Google Translate to create an entirely new localization of Final Fantasy IV. It was really, really cool because when he was writing the book, Google Translate updated their model. So he actually got to see the two versions of it side by side.
Wow.
Of the old Google Translate and the new Google Translate. And they're both bad. They are both terrible.
But it makes for a hugely entertaining read. I sat with that book for so long when we first got it.
Oh, it's so funny. I would love if he could if he would release a new updated edition where he could use ChatGPT for localization and see what that comes up with. Anyway, so the book we're talking about today, it was announced a few years ago that the next book in the Legends of Localization series was going to be focused on Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES. But that project seems to have stalled. And apparently Mandelin decided on a different strategy for his third book. Instead of focusing on the localization of a Japanese game into English, he would instead focus on the localization of an English game into Japanese. And again, given his extensive experience and connections into the world of the Mother series, it's really no surprise that he picked Undertale as his subject. Before we talk about it, Hilary, do you have any background with Undertale?
Other than playing it long ago now and really, really enjoying it and helping Mike, as he went through it for his review, which should definitely go in the show notes because it's creative and I like it. Not a whole lot of background other than just really enjoying the game.
I had a similar experience. For those who are listening, quite a few episodes ago now, I played it because we were talking about Undertale Yellow, which was a fan game.
Yes.
Set in Undertale, which was approved by Toby Fox. Apparently, it's just fantastic. But I wanted the background to play it. And to be honest, I've always wanted to play it, but I've always kind of avoided it because I hate Earthbound.
I knew it.
I hate Earthbound. I've tried playing Earthbound just so many times, and every single time I failed miserably. And finally this year, I was like, nope, I don't care how much I hate this. I'm getting through it. And I did, and it's done. So then after I beat it, I was like, well, might as well go to Undertale. And I played Undertale, and I loved it. So, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. For those of you who have been living under... exactly. For those of you who have been actually living in the underground since 2015, Undertale is a retro-style RPG developed by Toby Fox. Toby Fox got his start creating fan hacks of Earthbound. Famously, there was one that was set in Halloween, and eventually he decided to make his own game. That, though he was very much inspired by the tone and the art style of the Mother series, he wanted it to be its own beast altogether, his own IP. So he created Undertale. Undertale was, in 2015, there was nothing else like it. Arguably, there still isn't anything like it. It features just so many different ways that you can play the game. You can play the game with a run through where you kill literally every monster, but you can also do a pacifist playthrough, which would make the doctor very happy because everybody lives. And it is, it's touching and fascinating. It's a brilliant deconstruction of JRPG tropes. Also, it also tells a very meta, though heartfelt story with some absolutely incredible characters. Just an astoundingly beautiful cast of characters. And in short, frankly, the game is absolutely lovely. And though there have been some fan games in the past that started, a fan craze, Undertale undeniably created probably one of the biggest ones. An incalculable amount of fan work appeared online after Undertale was released that celebrated Fox's unique creation, fan art, stories, just so much incredible. And of course, fan games, Undertale Yellow. And moreover, it also started making a splash elsewhere in the world. It became so popular in the West that it became known in the East. Unsurprising because, they actually, because the East actually has most of the Mother series and we don't. And that brings us to Legends of Localization Book 3, Undertale. So before we actually talk about the book, let's talk about, the book. So it's a hardcover. Got my copy right here. Hardcover, it's in black with like a red metallic highlight in the top left-hand corner. It is, as with all of the Legends of Localization books, and arguably all of the books from Fan Gamers, it's a gorgeous looking book. To the point where this is the first time I've actually opened my physical copy. It's been sitting on my shelf. I had a PDF of it that I got and that I purchased because I didn't really want to. I didn't want to accidentally damage the book. I'm going to be, playing with the book today. So you might hear, unlike most random encounters, you might hear books. You might hear book in the background because I'm going to be opening it, flipping through it on both sides. It's really cool tome. The first Legends of Localization book was a nice link green. The second was kind of a purplish color, and this is just good solid black. Okay, so before this is not going to be a structured talk. This is not going to be going through the book section by section. This is going to be very much a rambly talk from both of us about this really, really cool book. Oh, before we start talking about Undertale, though, I will mention the beginning of it. The beginning of it is really useful because, unlike his prior Legends of Localization books, this one really gets into what localization means, but not just Japanese to English, also English into Japanese or other languages. He gives a lot of examples of how to do it properly, a lot of examples of how to spectacularly screw it up, and it's a useful, it provides a useful amount of context, I think, for folks who don't really know what they're getting into. But honestly, if you bought a book called Legends of Localization, you probably know what you're getting into.
Yeah, and I think it allows for a new and possibly slightly easier to understand perspective on it, just looking at it from the flip side of having something that existed in English first, because you get very, very clear and familiar examples of kind of some of those struggles and pitfalls. And it's, you'll understand right away because you have some cultural context. A lot of the expressions and things that need to be translated and may not translate into Japanese.
Exactly. And another thing that makes this a little bit different from the other two books is the period of the game that is being localized, because the first book was about Legend of Zelda, so that would have been 86, which was at the dawn of the modern video game industry. And then even Earthbound, even though by that point the SNES and the Nintendo Entertainment System, the industry was firmly cemented in place, it was still pretty darn early on in terms of localization. Nowadays, like, we just don't, unless it's a really indie team who don't really know what they're doing, we don't really get localizations like we did back in the day. Nowadays, it is a very professional industry. And though there might be some screw ups, the level of creativity that goes into adapting a work for a completely other audience, another language, another cultural context is really quite amazing.
Yeah, and it's been amazing. Like, as someone who kind of grew up as this process matured, I think this book really drives it home. It's amazing to see just how that process of localization is approached with, increasing consideration, finesse, thoughtfulness, and a lot of work.
So much work. I mean, the book also goes through a bit of Toby Fox's experience in making the game, not in super detail. This is not a making of book, but it does, because Clyde Mandelin and Toby Fox, they know each other apparently quite well. So it is it provides a nice level of access that the other two books didn't necessarily have in the same way, because those were written years after the fact in a different country. Yeah, whereas this is not right now. This was about 2000, and this localization was happening in about 2016, 2017, I think, a few years after the game was released. It just provides a couple of nice little tidbits. For example, like, it mentions the very successful Undertale crowdfunded campaign, which apparently, according to this, brought in 10 times more money than he originally asked for, which is very, very nice. Obviously, the response to Undertale here in the West was overwhelmingly positive. I mean, Mike gives it I will put this review in. Mike gives it a 95, for example. Our original review for it was Fenner. Fenner gave it a 95 too. And Alana reviewed it in 2017. She gave it a 90. So, like, the game is right across the board. All three of our reviews, big thumbs up.
Yeah. And I think another thing that this specific entry really brings to the table for the series, Legends of Localization, is that level of access. It feels like not only was the author able to be, like, involved in the process and had a good running understanding of, the decisions that Toby Fox was making, but also because of Toby's background, he was very involved in the localization process himself. And I think that's, like, one of the key takeaways from this book, is that he was very involved. And it's one of the threads that I really like to follow through the book, is kind of what decisions he was making, kind of what he told the team, and the back and forth, and, what he insisted on keeping and where he was a little bit more flexible. It's really, really fascinating stuff. And also fan translations.
Yeah.
Not to pivot too much in subjects, but Undertale was so amazingly popular, like you just said, when it came out, that he, in a sense, kind of had to understand and be aware of some fan translations for his game, which must have been a very interesting experience for him, given, his connections and kind of history in the fan space.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me because I imagine, well, they moved as fast as they could. Fan culture online moves much faster. So, like you said, there were fan translations of Undertale out there that were complete well before they started the official fan translation, which has got to be interesting in Japan that there's a couple of different versions of it. I imagine that it might be somewhat novel for them because here in the West we are intimately familiar with the idea of having about 3 or 4 different versions of a game. Especially, let's just take Final Fantasy V, for example. Like we are, we have the original fan translation, which was the first way I played it. And in my memory, it's not the definitive version, but it's certainly a special one. Then we got the official translation with the PlayStation.
Yep, that was mine.
Yeah, with the PlayStation port. Then we got a better one with the Game Boy Advanced, and then we got eventually what we have now, which is the Pixel Remaster, theoretically the best version of it. But there are still debates to this day whether his name is Barts or Butts.
Yep.
And I imagine that in Japan about Undertale, there's probably similar arguments being had over which is better, the fan translation or the actual localization.
Yeah. Oh, there are a couple specific instances of that in the book, and I'm not going to go like delving for page numbers, but definitely. And I think I remember it being kind of described as like a dispute on how to translate a certain line that could have multiple potential meanings. And then when the official translation came out, that kind of like settled the matter, which is interesting.
Well, in many places, I think it was also pronouns and how they refer to how each character refers to themselves.
Yep.
And how that is, because that's not really a concept that we have here in English, at least not to the same extent. It really does affect the way that the characters express themselves in a way that we don't really get here.
Right.
So the fan translations used different pronouns and also different dialects.
Yep.
Here I'm just flipping. I was flipping through it. Sans, for example.
He uses ore, right?
Yeah, so a rural, unsophisticated bumpkin vibe. But it's also used for aloof, happy-go-lucky characters.
Luffy from One Piece, for example.
Yeah.
First one I could think of. And
this was a good example of fan translations. They were responded with a tremendous amount of negativity. And because this was not what it originally was in the fan translations. So again, doesn't matter what culture, turns out the internet is pretty damn opinionated about things.
And, I think Toby and the author of this book are very, very well aware of that and very mindful of the pronouns being like a key and kind of a big difference between Japanese and English. Because I think there's like a little panel describing the pronoun choices and that decision process for most of the main characters as you go through the book.
There very much is. And the team they got to work on this, there's a section talking about how Toby Fox was trying to find the right team. Eventually, they discovered a localization company based in Japan called 84 Limited, which 84 being obviously a reference to level 84 in Super Mario Brothers. And they, looking at some of their work here, like their resume, they couldn't really have picked a better company to do a English to Japanese localization. I mean, they're responsible for like Shovel Knight, Into the Breach, Hades, and what I imagine the head translator, had a astoundingly monumental job. She localized Return of the Obra Dinn, which could not have been easy.
Oh, nope.
Yeah, that would have been hard, I would imagine. It's interesting how they did it because, again, Mandelin has, I would argue, a unprecedented level of access here. So, like, we actually get a look at the spreadsheets of, like, dialogue in English, dialogue in Japan, like the translation in progress as it goes through, which is really, really cool.
I think he goes into extensive detail on like Toby's note-taking process and just, we're fortunate that Toby has the knowledge of Japanese that he does, and it was able to be such a back and forth. But yeah, all very well documented.
Oh, very much. And one of the things that I think most people know about nowadays, but when you think about localization, in the earlier days of the SNES, for example, you think most of the work is primarily text-based. So it's you take a look at the script, you translate the entire script, and there's your job done. But that's not the case, especially not nowadays, because there is such a thing as graphics. So not only did the team need to localize the entire script, they also needed to localize all of the illustrations, which are very important in this game specifically. By the way, if you haven't played Undertale, you should, because we're probably going to be talking about a few spoilers here. We won't get into anything too heavy, but there are parts of the game, for example, where some of the commands at the bottom during fights get destroyed and shattered, and that is kind of an important thing. And so it required them to redraw all of those commands. So you couldn't show mercy because it was destroyed. Well, they're not going to use the word mercy in Japan. So, and then there was the technical side of it, where you also needed to think about like fonts, how things are going to fix.
I was going to say, couldn't have picked a better game for kind of the visual elements and the impact that can have on localization, because we've got 2 characters named after fonts. So
yes,
how does that translate?
Exactly.
So there's a big long section about choosing fonts in Japanese for sans and papyrus. And
also fonts play a very important role in characterization in Undertale in a way that arguably, here's the thing, somebody might not think, fonts aren't important. Well, try telling that to anyone who played the Pixel remasters when they first came out. Fonts matter big time for nostalgic reasons. For when I was playing the Pixel remasters, I wasn't as vocal as everyone else about the weird font, but I was like, this is different and I don't like it.
Right.
And that's certainly the case with the various characters speaking with specific fonts, which is a brilliant way of expressing characterization, and something that very likely would not translate into Japanese.
Yeah, right. I mean, here in our English-speaking world, there are kind of specific ideas associated with fonts, especially Comic Sans and Papyrus.
Yes, nobody has an opinion on Comic Sans.
Nope.
That's ridiculous. It's a fascinating, the book goes through, once you're through all of this, once you're through all the preamble, the book sort of starts going through the various events pretty much chronologically. But because one of the coolest things about it is it really does dig into specific references and how those references can be adapted in a way that doesn't just make sense to Japanese audiences, but fits the feel of what Fox was trying to communicate in his original version.
Exactly. And that's got me thinking about not just a font, but there's so much going on in terms of syntax and repetition and embellishment. All the main characters speak so differently.
Well, one of the big problems with the game is that there are a lot of puns in this game, and obviously puns don't get localized properly because they're very much contingent on one English word being similar to another English word. So not only did they need to they couldn't just rewrite the puns, or they needed to come up with entirely new jokes that were in the spirit of the original jokes but worked in Japanese.
I think some of my favorite moments in this book are the occasional kind of little blurb where they're like, oh, hey, this pun worked. We found a way to make it work with minimal change.
Exactly. It is an interesting look on how the level of creativity that is actually required for localization, because it is not just a rote sit down, look at a Japanese phrase, write the English phrase translation, next. If that was the case, especially nowadays, machine translation could do it in 5 minutes.
Right. And that's how you end up with a lot of those, unnatural sounding older translations in some cases is, it started out kind of a little bit more literal, so to speak. And we've definitely learned. And I think I'd argue that's one of the main ways that localization has really grown over time is that sort of attention to detail and understanding that creative process a little bit more. because
Yeah.
before really, but the video game industry, wasn't quite aware of it at first until they started doing it and translating the games. So
One thing that was interesting, I can't come up with a specific example of this, is because this was very much based on like the feel of it, the tone and everything. It was inspired by Earthbound. There are a lot of Earthbound references in Undertale.
yep.
But what's funny is because Earthbound is a localization of a Japanese game, some of those references didn't make sense when translated word for word because they weren't in Mother 2. So
Right.
those references needed to be changed over to match the original localization of Mother 2.
Right, the original Japanese, yeah, or when
Yeah.
they could. Yeah. And one of the major things I noticed when I played Undertale was kind of the similarity with the battle system and some of the Shin Megami Tensei and early Persona games with the battle options and kind of that negotiation process and different ways of dealing with battles. Um, and so it's cool to go through and see just how many different video game references and areas of inspiration that there are for, start to finish, really. Like you're going through this kind of chronological look at the game, but the whole book is peppered with, oh hey, here's a little area that's inspired by, Shin Megami Tensei or whatever other games. And there are several, but there's some neat little asides.
Oh, here's one of my favorites that was included: a reference to a reference to uh, a video game reference that basically anybody would get, except Japan wouldn't, which is one of the characters. There's an exclusive boss battle in the Nintendo Switch version against Mad Mew Mew, which I never saw because I played it on PC. And she describes the battle as saying, "That was gnarly, tubular, way cool, awesome, groovy, mondo, outrageous, funky." And these are all references to the special stages from Super Mario World. When you beat the Star Road, you get into the special stages, and they're like the super hard stages, and they're all secret, and they're all named those. But in Japan, the roughly translated names of the courses are Fun Course, Fun Course, even the Mario staff will be Surprised Course, even the Mario staff will be Surprised Course, Specialist Course, and Championship Course. So the fact that this is a reference to a Japanese game, but Japanese audiences wouldn't get it, is very amusing to me.
And that's situational, and one of the really cool things about this specific project.
Mm-hmm. I also find it interesting that, I mean, in most Japanese games and media, there is some English use. There are lots of English words in Japanese games, but here, for example, they needed to localize some of those words. So dating start became known as date start, or hangout start became known as Matari start. And he gives some other examples about like, let's see here. The victory message in the original Japanese version of Dark Souls uses very simple English intended for Japanese players by saying, "You defeated," instead of "victory achieved," which is pretty cute.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's see here. Waterfall. So yeah, like I said, the book goes through continuously with from beginning to end. And one of the things I love about this book is it's not just, I mean, there are lots of pictures. That's what I like about it. But there are also lots of footnotes along the way that are diving into specifics behind some Japanese culture, some Japanese pop culture explanations that we wouldn't get. And they're all along the sides here. So it's actually really, really easy to absorb. It's a very nice breakdown in a way that you can just absorb the whole page. You don't have to jump around a whole lot. It's a smart layout.
Yeah, no question. And that's one of the like, as someone who is a big fan of bitmap and their kind of more visually oriented work, like it makes sense to me, especially for this game, that there are so many visuals, and they all are printed well, and they look really nice laid out. So whoever did the layout for this, excellent work.
Well, I unfortunately do not actually have, my knowledge of Japanese is remarkably limited. I would say entirely limited. So one of the coolest things about this book was it does provide a little bit of background into Japanese characters and how they are used in video games. And one of the reasons why certain types of writing are used in comparison to. I'm enjoying this book. So, for example, Japanese half-width characters were used for technical and historical reasons for early Japanese computing systems. But modern technology and robust text encoding standards have made half-width characters mostly obsolete, though they still appear occasionally in a handful of ways. So it's like delving into like little things like that make this a fascinating read. You're going to learn a lot, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I found myself honestly almost, and I think this is kind of true for anything in this series, but especially, the unique situation that this book represents. I found myself looking at existing games we were playing. Like, one example is right after this, I was getting introduced to Metal Gear Solid, and because of this book, I realized and kind of picked up on the fact, like, wait a minute, okay, Otakon. So that's an English convention, and I should see what his Japanese name is and figure out why they said Otakon.
Mm-hmm. I'm reading. I've gotten to the Hotland section of the book, and they're talking about Alphys. Apparently, this was one of the sections where Toby Fox was tremendously involved in the localization.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, because you needed to be able to find that mix between the confidence and the complete lack of confidence when outside of her comfort zone. So also, I just learned based on this. Well, I didn't just learn because I learned it when I read it that the character's pronounced Alphys. When I first played it, I read it as Alphas.
Interesting. Yeah, I always said Alphas too.
Yeah, Alphys. Alphys is apparently the actual pronunciation of Alphys' name. Another thing that they were obviously paying very close attention to were the enemy types, because every single area has a variety of different area types. There are often clues in their dialogue as to how you need to respond to them in order to show mercy. And oftentimes there's lots of graphical rewriting needed in order for it to actually play properly. So random things, for example, let's see here. I'm trying to find a good example of this. Oh, here's a cool thing how they translated it. So there were in one of the earlier worlds, there was a character named Snowdrake who wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and their father is a stand-up comedian. So originally in this pronunciation, the stand-up comedian who you meet later on at this resort has according to Toby Fox, talks like a weird Jewish dad in a stilted way. So I imagine that it is very kind of showbiz, the Catskills, like comedian at the Catskills kind of thing, but that doesn't really translate over. So apparently they gave the father a thick Osaka accent, and they, I think it's manzai comedy, where it's somewhat similar to an idiot and a straight man playing off of each other. So it's fascinating how they used that and localized that concept by, again, using cultural means that everyone would know.
Yeah. I'm stuck on the visuals. I'm still kind of looking through, and one thing I'm not sure we mentioned yet, but I want to make sure we do mention is, we're talking about how there's localization that needs to be done with visuals. In Undertale, that's also particularly true with some of the attacks, right? Because some enemies have like attacks that are meant to look a certain way. And here there's like a whole page about one of Papyrus's that's actually bones spelling out words. And so it's all about how they had to figure out a translation for the cool dude that, scrolls across, and had to fit it and time it correctly so that the Japanese characters fit.
Mm-hmm. Here is a really cool thing that I think if anyone's played the game, they would know. And this is the kind of choices, this is a great representation of the kind of choices that need to be made when you are localizing something. And that is the line, "Despite everything, it's still you," which is arguably the most famous line from the game. It's interpreted in many, many different ways. In my opinion, just as a writer, it's a beautiful piece of writing. It's a beautiful combination of 5 words that says so much about this game and what it says about itself. I love it. It's a beautiful line. However, the question is, how do you localize an iconic line like that into another language and maintain its meaning? Now, obviously, people have been doing this for years. There are lots of translations of Shakespeare out there, for example, that is beautiful line is poetry. I would argue that this line is poetry. So the question was, how do you localize this? And apparently they worked on it for quite a while. And eventually they decided that the important thing here was to make a literal translation here was more important than a poetic translation. So what it basically translates to in Japanese is a lot of things have happened, but self is self after all, which I don't speak Japanese, obviously, but arguably lacks the poetry of the original line. However, the intent is what they thought is the most important thing about it in the context of the game. So if a Japanese player is playing the game and they get to that mirror, their breath might not be taken away by that just incredible line, but the meaning will still be absorbed.
Right. And those are some of the trade-offs that may need to happen. And if you're lucky, during the process, maybe you'll see an opportunity to localize a different line in a more poetic way.
Oh, absolutely. There are probably lots of lines in this that are beautiful, just, not for us.
Yeah, even single words. Like, one of the parts of the blurb for this book that really, really got me hooked was this concept of determination, right? There's that gets expounded upon through action, all sorts of stuff in the game. But when you're localizing it, there are several different ways to translate that word, determination. So which do you use that fits the context of this game the best?
Yeah. Something that I don't think no, there's no way this is not a thing for just Canadians. I don't know whether or not Americans would have the same I guess feeling about it. So in Canada there is a significant the ever exhausting and never ending argument about Canadian content and what constitutes Canadian content, because we do have Canadian content requirements in the country, primarily because no offense, we live next to you, and and you guys tend to be noisy, especially with your pop culture. So it would have been, yeah. So in a good way, like the best of your pop culture just roars across the border like a wave. And culturally speaking, in so many ways, like the same touchstones of your pop culture are the same. Like we have the exact same ones because we've absorbed that media the same way you have. But because a national identity is important, especially in the 1970s, Canadian content requirements were put in place for the music industry, for television, for movies, things like that. And some of it's good, some of it's amazing, and some of it's not very good. But it always drove me crazy in a weird way that I don't speak French. I have an intermediate level of French, enough that if I was dropped in Montreal, I could probably survive without dying. But
good.
Yes, it's always important to have that level of another language. But in Quebec, because Quebec is primarily French speaking, their Canadian culture exploded in a way that ours never did. Like the Quebecois have their own like massive recording industry, music industry, various types of music. They have they have incredible theatrical communities, movies, television, and it always bothered me that there was this incredible art that was Canadian, depending on who you ask in Quebec, I guess, but that was Canadian that I could not appreciate on the same level as as someone who spoke French could. And it's one of the reasons that drove me, because I grew up in Nova Scotia. We had French class in school. I got an 85 in it. I couldn't speak French. I should not have gotten an 85. That's how good the French language classes were in Nova Scotia. It's one of the reasons that drove me to learn French to the level that I got. It's that I really, really wanted to be able to understand this, not just on a technical level, not just on a basic a basic translation level, but on a deeper level. And I have to admit, when I read this book, I know I'm getting off on a tangent here. When I read this book and I think about localization, I think, wow, there are probably so many touching lines and pieces of work, written work, that I might be able to understand, but which can't necessarily touch me in the same way because I'm getting a localization of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a tangent at all, because I think that's in essence exactly what this series is and does. It gives you a glimpse, it gives you a window into that kind of understanding, or at least, a slightly higher level of that understanding. It gives you a little bit of that context.
And the level that these folks at 8.4 Limited and localizers, period, went to in order to maintain the game and deliver a product that is very true to the original, that can be enjoyed on a level that is arguably the same as the original, at least hopefully.
Right. That's the goal.
That's the goal. That's the ideal. Whether or not that is the case is another question. My experience with Undertale by the end of it was now, okay, I'm going to be completely honest. I did a pacifist run of Undertale. I started a genocide run, and I'm not going to lie, I felt so guilty that I just
couldn't do it. I couldn't do it either.
Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Could not do it. I am the same. I am someone who has. It's so funny when I have to force myself to play the evil path in a lot of RPGs. If I'm reviewing it and one is available, I have to force myself to do it because I'm like, okay, there's another game here. I know there's another game here. I need to play the other game in order to be able to critique it. But I'm just like, I don't want to do the bad thing. I want to be a hero.
Right. And if that is your inclination at all, well, you're probably going to have even more acute trouble with Undertale.
Yes, because it certainly charged. Oh my God. I heard about Undertale in 2015. I obviously didn't play it until almost 10 years later. But oh my God, I wish that I could have played Undertale knowing nothing about it. Because the realization that someone would have had, because they're going to start playing the game, they're going to play it like any other RPG. And they're being presented with EXP, for example. And they're just going to be like, oh, experience points. They're just not going to end then.
Yeah, levels. Yeah, you gain levels.
Exactly. And they're going to be killing all these characters throughout. Maybe they won't do a genocide run, but like they're going to be killing a lot of characters, not occurring to them that there's a different way. And I imagine that Sans speech at the end, extermination points, that like probably would hit like it would have knocked them on the floor. That would have been an astounding thing to experience in the moment. It's still a brilliant game, but
yeah. But just
wow,
being able to experience that. Yeah. And I mean, actually, that is very reminiscent of yet another game that we didn't get until very recently, which is Moon. But yeah, I would love to experience that again. I tend to be kind of like attentive and cautious and like looking for those options in fights that are not fights. So I caught on pretty quickly. But yeah.
Oh, it's another cool thing about this is, and I'm just on the last pages here. Undertale there have been things added to Undertale over time. Apparently 8.4 is also working with them on that. I imagine, I don't think it's mentioned here, but I imagine Deltarune is also being localized, especially given how big a fan they were. And there's a really nice touch just at the very end. Mandelin, on a final note, I leave you with two challenges before you close the book. First, why do you think it's called localization and not something like globalization, regionalization, or culturalization? And the second challenge is the next time you watch your favorite movie or your favorite book or listen to your favorite music, listen out for things that would be lost in a straightforward literal translation. One of the reasons I very much enjoy this book is because it really does call attention to the process of localization, how important it is, and just how much I think we skim over it. Because as impressive as Undertale's localization is, Undertale is an indie game. It is a great indie game, and there is a lot of text there, but it is an indie game with a scope that, frankly speaking, can be understandable by a human mind. And then I think that Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth were originally made in Japanese. Holy shit.
We had similar thoughts, although my mind went to Baldur's Gate 3.
Oh god, yeah. Oh my god, yes. Like, just branching paths must be such a nightmare for localizers. Because branching paths usually converge in places and weave in and around each other, and that is going to be a very difficult job to bring into another language
and influence each other. You know,
oh, yeah.
One option here might cut off options C and D over here, but E and F are open. Like, yeah,
it's back in the day, years and years ago, when I was a kid. I at the time I deeply, okay, I'm not going to lie, I still deeply resent us not getting a lot of the Squaresoft RPGs in the 1990s. I still resent the hell out of it. I'm not even going to pretend that I don't. But I didn't understand why back then, because as a kid, I was just like, you just translate it. It's like I didn't get it. I didn't get like, well, if I was to get a one-to-one translated copy of Final Fantasy V, for example, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it very much because it probably wouldn't have been very good. Like, it's an art, and it's an art form that is evolving and becoming increasingly important in today's world.
Yeah, and that's something you love to see. I love this series for calling attention to it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we have at RPG Fan, we have our own, I guess, personal connections to some localizers.
We might be very slightly biased, and might have some insider understanding. A little.
Yes, some of our former staff members have gone on to, in my mind, certainly celebrated by us, careers in video game localization.
Mm-hmm.
When did it's Steven and I never knew either of them. They both left before I got here. Who are they? It's do you remember, Hill?
Yeah, Derek, I want to say Derek was here for like at least a couple years after I started, and Steven was kind of retired, but was still around on Slack when I started.
Those two are our localizers, right?
Yep, correct.
Yeah. So if either of those two are listening to this, thank you so much. Shout out and thank you so much for everything you do for all of us. So yeah, that is Legends of Localization Book 3 Undertale. Honestly, really, really cool book. Fascinating points of view throughout. And you really do learn a lot, and not just about Undertale. You learn a lot about the localization process in a way that you don't actually, in a different way from reading the other Legends of Localization books. Because again, those are Japanese to English. This is English to Japanese. And there is way more involved in that than you might think. It's eye-opening. It really is. So if you're listening to this and you're at all curious, you can find the book on fangamer.com. We're not getting paid to send anything their way. This is not a sponsorship deal or anything like that. And in fact, they didn't even send these books. This is just something that Hilary and I wanted to talk about for a while.
Yep.
And I highly recommend these books and many of the other books they have on their websites. Hill, I'm trying to think, what other sites would you recommend for folks if they're listening to this, if they're looking for some really good books on video games and RPGs specifically?
Oh, well, I already kind of shouted them out once, but Bitmap, they lean heavily on the visuals, but they've got some really nice kind of compendiums of different console areas, box art. We reviewed their JRPG book, but they also have a CRPG book that I'm hoping to look into in the future. They
Art
did
of
the
Adventure games.
Yep, they did Art of the Point and Click. Yeah, they're a smaller publisher and lovely. So I definitely recommend them. I think they're a good analog. I feel if you like this, I feel like it would be a similar sort of informative, visual, nonfiction kind of reference book sort of experience. So I think I'd recommend them the most.
Mm-hmm. Another place that I might send you towards is Limited Run Games have books out now, and there's some really, really good ones. The ones that I'm really into, the ones that I think are just absolutely frigging spectacular, are the book adaptations of Jeremy Parish's Works series. So he has NES Works, Super Nintendo Works. There are a series of YouTube videos which do like delve into these various things, and he's released several books. Let's see, he has Virtual Boy's Work, Super NES Works Volume 1, NES Works 1998, 1985, 1986, 1987. They're fascinating books. They're extraordinarily well researched, written, beautiful, beautiful copies. So yeah, check that out at Limited Run Games. Before we sign off here, Hilary, I had a question for you. I'm curious. The Legends of Localization series. If you had to pick a game or a series for the next book in this continuing series, what game would you suggest? What game would you want to see?
So I don't know how much you've been kind of paying attention to games that are currently in development. But there is a pretty fascinating dynamic kind of like dungeon crawly typing RPG called Cryptmaster.
Really?
Yes. And at PAX, they were talking about localizing into Spanish. And that got me thinking that would be absolutely fascinating, because the whole premise behind it is that you are kind of gathering letters as your adventurers remember things about themselves, because they're in this kind of crypt, gloomy atmosphere, and the Crypt Master's kind of trying to revive them, but you have to guess and fill in words to be able to do your attacks and interact, and to get answers to questions and to answer questions. So just the process of something that dynamic and that based around, kind of those specific properties of words, the letters, something that granular, I would be really, really interested, because Spanish has some different letters than English, even like on a fundamental level, for example. So what was that process like? I really want to know.
Yeah. Incidentally, for those who are curious about Cryptmaster, it looks awesome. And yes. We should have a review on the site by the time this episode comes out. I believe Jerry is on it. So it should be available on the site by the time this comes out. If it is, I'll have, there'll probably be a link in the show notes. If there's not, just go to the site. You can find it there. Mine will be unsurprising. I would love to see a Legends of Localization book based on the Yakuza series.
Yes. Talk about a series that's very like location and kind of culturally based.
And the fascinating thing about the Yakuza series, I mean, there's a lot of fascinating things about the Yakuza series, but the later games all have English dubs. The earlier, and obviously the very first game did, but the majority of the series doesn't. It is in original Japanese, but you have English text along the bottom. Everything is localized. I would be utterly fascinated to see a book like this focused on how they were able to create localizations of the dialogue in subtitles that follow the emotional through line of the Japanese performances in a way that is organic and feels natural, because it does, to the point where one of the most embarrassing things is, while I'm playing a Yakuza game, if I'm in the middle of a cutscene, sometimes I will be playing the game and there'll be a cutscene and I'll run out of tea, and I will get up and I will walk into the kitchen as the cutscene continues to play. And it won't be until like 20 seconds later that my brain goes, Jono, you can't understand Japanese. You don't understand Japanese. You have no idea what's being said right now.
But I know that Kiryu is angry.
Yes, but that's the thing. The performances are so good that it's like carrying me through. And it actually takes me a little while for my brain to be like, you're missing some very important information
right.
here. You might want to go back and check that out So yeah, I would love to see a Legends localization about the Yakuza series. Mind
That's
you,
a good choice.
I don't think there ever will be because A, it's a ridiculously expansive series, but also Clyde seems to be, I just call him Clyde like I know him. Mandelin is, I think, a lot more focused on both retro and retro inspired titles. But yeah, I would just love to see that.
Yeah, I mean, this series as it is definitely has that focus, but hopefully maybe it'll expand. I honestly, I like the concept so much. I think it would be, not to take work away from him or anything, but I think you could do so much with, maybe guest authors, or it could have so much reach and you could get so much interesting information.
Well, I think the book series is a success thus far. It's certainly still sold on the site. Clyde. See, I call him Clyde. I don't have a reason to call him Clyde. Apparently, you might actually have a reason to be like, yeah, Clyde, now we go way back.
Yeah, we go. Well, at least in passing. Yeah. So, story time. As I was getting my thoughts together and kind of looking through my stuff for this episode, I also looked through like my old folder of business cards and things like that. I have a business card of his from like the early 2010s, I think from Otakon, but I'm not 100% sure. So at some point, before I knew about this series, before I knew of his like pivotal role with localization and all these really interesting things, I think I casually ran into him at a convention, which just goes to show how small this world is.
It very, very much is. Well, hey, Hill, I just had a thought. You know, another place where folks can find a very interesting book about video games and RPGs.
Could it be our shop?
Yes, in fact, it is our shop. So we have a book. It is a collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, and the book is the RPG Fan Review Card Collection. And this is a showcase of nearly 300 of our review cards as seen on Instagram and our other social media sources. You can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop, along with many other fun things, shirts, mugs, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, take a look at the review card collection. I'm not joking about this. This isn't me just like hyping it. It has a place of honor right alongside my copy of Legends of Localization. I believe it its front cover is pressed up against the back cover of this book. So aww. I am in love with this little book, and I think you'll really like it too. So yeah, check it out.
Unabashedly, honestly, the review cards are beautiful. There's so much work. There are some special backgrounds for some titles that have either have a special graphical style or are of special import to the site. So it's kind of fun to go through from a visual perspective.
Yeah, there's a special old-timey one for Oberdin for my Oberdin review.
Yep. Fantastic. And it really is like we're talking about kind of how localization has changed over time. I mean, I don't think it's exaggerating, and I don't think it's, boastful to say that it is kind of a piece of video game history. I mean, review cards are relatively a newer thing, with our social media, but our site's been around so long that, we have reviews that span several years in that time period, but we've also took some special care to go back. And if we filled in some, important gaps in series as well, and made or altered review cards that are special for the book. And there are a lot of them.
Yeah. So it's a great book. Please check that out. Another way to support us here at RPG Fan is to check out all of our podcasts. Now, you've been listening to an episode of Random Encounter. If you want to support us, you can check out some of the past episodes. For example, this was a random book club, but it was not the first random book club. If you wanted to check out episode 247, you can check out the Art of Point and Click Adventure Games random book club. And that's where Hilary and I are chatting about, well, the point and click adventure game book. Another one that you can check out is episode 242, Random Book Club Fight Magic Items. Hilary and I are on this episode with the author of this book, Aiden, and we just get to talk about how the origins of the RPG genre, how it evolved through the 20th and 21st centuries. It was a really cool talk. I had a really, really good time with that.
Yep.
There's another random book club. There has to be another. No. That's not. We've recorded more than 2.
Did we do the JRPG bitmap?
We did. We did do the JRPG bitmap books.
Yep.
That was. We didn't call it Random Book Club though. That was when Greg was hosting with me.
Correct.
We did. Yes, it was Random Encounter 218. What is an RPG? A delightful little pile of adventure. So that is Greg, myself, and Hilary, and Steph is on there too, talking about the Guide to Japanese Role-Playing Games, which had a cover that was designed and drawn by Steph, and it is so gorgeous. It is just so gorgeous. So if you want to check out past Random Book Club episodes, there's your things. Now here's admission time. This is a concept I've stolen from my favorite podcast, Cortex. And it's called An Episode Out of Time. So this means that this episode has been recorded way in the past, and we pull it out when we need an episode for some reason. And these are just really, really great to have around. So the problem is I can't really tell you what the last episode of Random Encounter was, because I have no idea what is currently happening in the world of video games right now. We're not even at Not E3 2024 yet, so I don't know if Mother 3 was announced, for example, and that entire conversation I had earlier in it, people are like, what is he talking about? Did he miss that news? I don't know, because I'm not there. I'm sure that my future self just did a fine episode focusing on, going by past performance, probably Yakuza. Check out those episodes of Random Encounter. We also have Retro Encounter, which is RPG Fans' retro podcast. Again, I am in the past. I have no idea what is happening right now. So I am sure that Solosi just did a fine episode focusing on going by past performance, probably Dragon Quest.
I thought you were going to say Yakuza again.
Or possibly Yakuza. Yes, exactly. And we also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fans' music podcast. Who knows if there will even be music in the future? It might be outlawed, like dancing was in Footloose.
No, I don't want a Footloose scenario. If I was on it, you can pretty much guarantee I made some sort of comparison with a classical piece.
Yes, exactly. So yes, listen to that episode where Hilary talks about a comparison with classical music. That episode. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future episodes, any discussion questions, we love those. Anything else you'd like to share, please fire it my way. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Mastodon, providing Mastodon still exists. Who knows? It's in the future. At jono@mastodon.social. Hilary, where can we find you online?
Best place to reach me would be probably my RPG Fan email, which should still exist. Hilary@rpgfan.com.
If you are enjoying this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. You can also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Hilary, thank you so much for giving me your evening, and much more than just your evening, because you read this entire tome with me. I love doing random book clubs. It's been a while since we did one, so I'm really delighted that we got a chance to.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for, joining me and gushing. There's just so much exciting information and so much to digest from this book. I appreciate the kind of freeform approach. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's this is a book. Frankly, this is a series that is well worth your money, folks. I think these books are they're informative, they're fascinating, they're very well written, intimately researched, and they're actually beautiful books to have on your shelf. So highly recommend them. Incidentally, if you're wondering if there was a continuity error, because I actually announced the number of the podcast off the top, that's because I spent like 5 minutes recording like every number in the next 4 months. And Hilary was very kind to just sit here and listen to me ramble by welcome to Random Encounter 2 for like 5 minutes. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, Hilary, and thank you for everything else.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Final thought is, this is also a wonderful book for busy people, and this is definitely something that has been or will be in my review, depending on when that goes up on the site. But this series, and especially this entry, is the perfect book, honestly, for a busy person who just wants to pick up, read a chunk, learn a lot. It's easily digestible in small pieces.
It very much is. It's just a real good book. All right. Well, again, Hilary, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And to everyone out there listening, whatever you're playing or whatever you're reading, have fun.